You remind me of a gig they took away from me. Basically says that the Pocket 4K is not a professional cinema camera.
I can't sign that.
It might be suicide. You won't survive here. You're not a professional. And you're in the land of professionals now. Hey guys, Spencer Sakurai here again, and today we are doing another camera comparison. We're going to compare the Blackmagic Pocket 4K versus the Ursa Mini 4.6K. Now, the opening scene here is a recreation from the movie Sicario, and I shot it with both cameras, and I intermixed the footage. And I think you'll realize pretty quick that it's really hard to tell the difference between each camera in a controlled environment like this. Now, before I reveal the cameras behind the shots, let's talk about specs for a second. Now, the body of the Pocket 4K is only $1,300, and the body of the Ursa Mini 4.6K is around $5,000. Which I think is really interesting because the Pocket 4K really holds up. Once you put a Metabone speed booster on there, you're really going to see that these cameras match pretty well. Now, the Ursa Mini 4.6K does have 15 stops of dynamic range, which is much more than the Pocket 4K. It's rated at 13 stops of dynamic range. And the sensor sizes are different, and that's kind of a bummer, but once you put a Metabone speed booster on the Pocket 4K, it gets really close to the same frame size as the Ursa Mini 4.6K. Well, I think a lot of people are going to want to compare these cameras because they're going to want to get the Pocket as a B camera for their main camera, which could be an Ursa Mini Pro or just a regular Ursa Mini 4.6K. Now, you might think the Pocket 4K is a no-brainer to get because of the price. I want to dive into that for a second. So once you get the Pocket 4K, it's $1,300. Also, it's like not available anywhere right now, so that's a downside. You have to get a speed booster, and the Viltrox speed booster and the other ones on Amazon are really rubbish. My friends and I have tested out many of those, and they're really not good. So you need to get the Metabones branded speed booster, and that's going to run you $650 to $700. Maybe you can get a little cheaper used. So now you're already up to a $2,000 price point. The battery life on the Pocket 4K is really not that good. They did just release a new update, which gives you about double the battery life for an LPE6 battery, the Canon batteries that go into the Pocket. But that's still only going to give you about an hour of runtime on each battery, and it's really a pain in the butt swapping those batteries when you're working in a professional environment. So keeping that in mind, if you want to kit out this camera to make it a professional cinema camera, you're going to want to get a V-mount for it. You're going to want to get that power adapter to plug that into it so you can run the camera for a long period of time, which is good. It will run for a long time on a V-mount battery. On top of that, you're going to have to get a CFast card for it, which are not really inexpensive, so it is a cheap body, and you do have extra money probably to spend on this kind of thing, but keep all this in mind when you're looking into the Pocket 4K. Now, you could shoot on an SD card, but it's going to really limit you on what codecs you can use with this camera. And then you're probably going to want to put a cage on the Pocket 4K to make it more usable. So the price tag gets pretty high. Now, I own the Blackmagic Ursa Mini 4.6K, just the regular version, not the Pro version. The Pro version has quite a few more features, and I do like it more. Now, the reason I bought the Ursa Mini 4.6K and not the Pro is because I found this online used for $3,000. So when you're comparing that to the Pocket 4K and after kitting it out, it gets pretty equalized there. Now, this camera has a super 35mm sensor. It actually has a taller sensor if you want to do anamorphic on it, which is really awesome. Now, the Pocket 4K does have a 4:3 sensor, so you could do anamorphic lenses on it as well. Now, both cameras can do audio in some way. You can do the little mini XLR for the Pocket 4K, or you get two full-size XLR ports on the Ursa Mini 4.6K. They both have really nice screens on them. They both have 5-inch screens. They're both touch screens. They have the same menus. There's a lot of commonalities between these two cameras. The Ursa Mini does have the option for the added-on viewfinder though, and has multiple SDI ports. Now, a lot of the affordable monitors out there these days do not have SDI ports on them, and so you need to be aware of that when buying this camera. I think everyone out there right now is pretty stoked on the Pocket 4K because of its price, but if you can find an Ursa Mini 4.6K use, you'll notice that the price difference really isn't that big. And then once you kind of kit them out and get them on the same level, you're maybe on $1,000 difference on the two, but you're gonna get 2 more stops of dynamic range out of this sensor, and in my opinion, it looks a lot prettier. But that's just my opinion, so let's look at some comparison footage and so you can make your own judgment call. Now in this first setup, I use some afternoon daylight coming through the window, and I bounced that off a white reflector into my wife's face, and I just sat her in front of the window and she's being backlit by the sun. So it's a pretty bright scenario, and rather than using an ND filter, I wanted to make this fair, so I did not use any ND filters at all. I just sharpened that shutter speed to get the exposures pretty close on each camera. Like I said before, I really like to do controlled practical tests on this channel. And so for this next setup, I put my wife in a corner and I lit her with an Aperture 120D to have complete control over the light and the situation and see what the cameras look like side by side. Now I did not have 2 Sigma 18-35s for this comparison, but I did have the 18-35 and the 24-70. The Sigma glass is pretty close, so I think it'll do fine for this comparison. So I shot both these cameras at ProRes 422 HQ, and I also shot them both in Ultra HD, once again just to make it more practical. Now the Ursa Mini can obviously do 4.6K, but it's not always necessary, and it's still going to downsample from that full sensor, and it's still going to look really nice, and you're going to still get all that dynamic range. I think Ultra HD is a really good resolution to work with for the sake of exporting and to have the extra resolution for zooming in and whatnot. Now of course you could shoot at 4.6K, but just for this comparison I shot them both in Ultra HD. Now you can look at the test I did in this video where I shot the Pocket 4K at 3200 ISO to light a scene from the movie The Social Network, and it turned out really well even though I was shooting at 3200 ISO. So that is definitely a pro that the Pocket 4K has over the Ursa Mini. The Ursa Mini definitely falls apart in lower light. Something else to consider when comparing these two cameras is that the Ursa Mini does have infrared pollution. I have not noticed that on the Pocket 4K yet, but I have had that problem with the Ursa Mini. I even have an infrared filter, and it seems to not work very well, but honestly, just a $29 ND filter on Amazon, the Zomi ND filter is what I'm using usually. It cuts most of the IR for me, so that shouldn't be a big deal for you, but I would say do not just get an IR cut because it may not work. There's other people on YouTube that have done this test, and you can definitely go look at their videos to see which one would work best for the camera. So let's jump back to the opening scene. I recreated a few shots from the movie Sicario, and I was trying to mimic shots from one of the greatest cinematographers of all time, Roger Deakins. Now this isn't a lighting tutorial, I just really wanted to control the light and the environment so you could see the two cameras in a practical situation like I normally do on this channel. Now it's pretty simple to light the scene. I just used an Aperture 120D and the light dome that you can modify it with. As usual, it was just kind of trying to find how much brightness I needed and how much light I needed to take away with negative fill, and I had to set up the scene just right just to make it look like the original shots. Now take a look at these shots again and try to figure out which camera is shooting each shot. You remind me of a gig they took away from me. So I picked the two sides of the story to justify which camera to use. So she's clearly advocating for the Pocket in this story, and my character's advocating for the Ursa Mini. So I shot all of my shots on the Ursa Mini and all of her shots on the Pocket 4K. I think that when you're in a controlled environment and you're cutting shots between each other, it's really easy to get the same look because you have the same lighting. Now the dynamic range is different, but I really lit this scene pretty dark. I really didn't light it very bright, and so I had a lot of room to play in the bottom end of the spectrum, which is where they're both going to do just fine. They're both going to have a nice codec to work with, and they both have a nice latitude and color, and I think that they look really well side by side. You won't survive here. You're not a professional. And you're in the land of professionals now. Could you tell a big difference? Which camera do you think is the better one to buy right now? I personally think the Ursa Mini 4.6K is the winner here. Not to say that the Pocket is bad by any means, but you can't even buy a Pocket right now. They're back ordered everywhere, and the Ursa Minis are still going for sale for like $3,000 all over the internet. So if you're in a pinch right now and you need to buy a camera, I would really suggest getting the Ursa Mini. And it's probably gonna be my camera going forward because it just does so much for so little money. I do think the Pocket 4K is an amazing camera, and it's a great B camera for this camera. With just a little tweak of white balance, they basically look the same in most environments, and I would highly recommend getting both of these if you need an A and B camera. Now, some might say that doing all these workarounds makes it not a professional camera. They do call it a cinema camera, and I do think it has a cinematic image. But just keep that in mind that it is still like in a DSLR form factor, and you're not gonna be able to walk in and just start shooting amazing images out of this camera. It needs to be kitted out. It needs to be built in a way to make it usable to really get pretty images out of it. And so to call it a professional camera is kind of up to you. You can definitely use it in professional environments, but I would choose the Ursa Mini any day before choosing the Pocket. If you want to see more comparisons like this in the future, let me know. Obviously, if you like this video, give me a thumbs up, and if you loved it, subscribe. Until next time, guys, see ya.